there's a fundamental mission drive, and in many instances, I think a moral imperative to actually do what we're doing for as many people as possible, and to do it intelligently and in a way that is actually going to bring some kind of either musical relief or solace.
Welcome to Arts Engines. I am your host, Aaron Dworkin. And with us as today's guest, we have Matthew Loden, who serves as the CEO of the Toronto Symphony Orchestra. So excited to be able to have you on the show with us, Matthew.
Oh, it's great to be here, Aaron. Wonderful to see you again.
And also, we're so excited that the Toronto Symphony is also one of our creative partners for the show, really helping us to curate and identify some of these core topics, obviously, that are so important to our audience. So thank you so much for that. So I figured I'd really kind of just dive right in and talk about one of the things that I think is really unique for you to be able to share with our audience is kind of this vantage point from Toronto. The reality is that a lot of our arts leaders, practitioners, and artists might be in the States. We do have some international audience, but to get a sense of your perspective in Toronto and in arts organization, especially in orchestra, looking to kind of identify itself to say, who are we in this city? What is our role in a city like Toronto? And would love to just kind of start with what is kind of a broad question, but to throw that out there and see where it takes us.
Yeah, of course. No, it's a great question. I think by and large, there's more similarities than dissimilarities between Toronto and any major symphony orchestra in a large city in the States. I came here from Philadelphia, where I'd spent the last 6 years with the Philadelphia Orchestra, and so that's oftentimes my reference point. And you know, the same challenges that an orchestra has around balancing the revenues with their expenses, making sure that you attract a new patron base, making sure that you're constantly connecting one way or another with important aspects of your community. That's all the same. The other thing that's all the same right now in the pandemic is the fact that none of us can actually do what we do really well, which is to make incredible musical moments for people that are in front of you, right? And so, so I think there is a kind of solidarity between everyone that's one way or another involved with the orchestra business, regardless of the country that you're in. What's a little bit different in Canada is that there is a different kind of attention to some of the government funding that actually supports arts and cultural organizations. So here in Canada, there's actually a Ministry of Arts and Culture and a Ministry of Heritage, both at the provincial level and at the federal level. So there's regular funding that makes up anywhere from probably 15 to 30% of arts and cultural revenue budgets, just depending on where you are in Canada.
Right.
So
something, of course, we idealize here and would love to see at some point in the future.
Totally. I would love to see that for the States also. I think it sets the right kind of example, saying that there is actually extraordinary cultural and civic value to supporting arts organizations, not just the big legacy organizations like the Toronto Symphony Orchestra, but the grassroots initiatives that become the pipeline for the talent and the the creative push that orchestras benefit from ultimately.
Awesome. Absolutely awesome. And so when you think about, just before we get off of the public funding, because I wanted to talk a little more about the kind of city of Detroit, where we're broadcasting from, but right, city of Toronto, but is with that public funding, does there come along with that an increased sense of responsibility to the broader public? Because of that sense of public funding, is there a sense that we need to maybe do things that another arts organization, maybe in the States, that has, less than 1% of its funding coming from tax dollars, may have less of a responsibility? Could you kind of speak to that?
Yeah, I guess I would kind of flip the question around a little bit and suggest that anyone who's leading an arts organization in the States or in Toronto should not be doing important artistic and community-based work only because the government is paying you to do something, right? There's a fundamental mission drive, and in many instances, I think a moral imperative to actually do what we're doing for as many people as possible, and to do it intelligently and in a way that is actually going to bring some kind of either musical relief or solace, or if it's in the health and well-being sectors, like actually make people healthier and better as a result. So I think that it's a helpful motivator to know that there are certain expectations as a result of some of the public funding that comes to us. But I think that if you are a theater company or a ballet or an opera or whatever, a performing arts organization, you know that ultimately you're a public trust one way or another. And in this day and age, there is a fantastically acute laser beam focus on the population paying attention to what we're doing and to calling us out when we're not doing it the right way. And so, you know what? That's like, it's what it should be, right?
Absolutely. So, and I love, by the way, that sense, and of course, could not agree more that that is how it should be for all arts organizations. So I think that's very powerful for all of our audience, especially those who are leading institutions where they may not have achieved that level of impact or that breadth of impact that you're referencing. So for organizations, or say that, you know, an orchestra in a big city, and who's saying, okay, you know, if we look at it, maybe we really aren't really responding, or we haven't in 50 years reimagined our role in our city. When you look at your relationship with the city of Toronto, how have you gone about that? How do you look at the city and understand or really reimagine the role of the orchestra? Do you look at demographics? Do you look at various cultural aspects of the city? I would be curious, kind of really pragmatically, how do you look at that, where some of our audience may be able to learn or want to replicate some of those things?
Well, I mean, it's a fundamental question, right? And for us, 2 years ago, when I first got up to Toronto, we began a year-long strategic planning process. And the first thing that we did was we actually looked at ourselves. And we said, you know, on the inside, who is it that we think that we want to be? Before we start to test ourselves with metrics and demographics and audiences out there, when we say that we want to be more a part of audience X, like, why is that? Is that just anecdotal? What is it that actually is motivating that from the inside? And what we found was that among the internal constituents of a symphony orchestra, there is such a wide interest in identifying what it is that we should be doing, right? We should be focusing on something. And the challenge is, how do you actually focus enough on your core beliefs and values and product, your content, without diversifying so much that mission creep happens and you're sort of, you know, because you're trying to be something for everyone, you're nothing for anyone. And what wound up happening as a result of that, we came up with 3 pillars that we sort of organized as many of our decisions as we possibly can at the Toronto Symphony Orchestra around. The pillars are to create, to create, to challenge, and to connect. And it's nice and alliterative, and it fits together. The reality is, we know that we have a responsibility before we start to curate an experience, or before we go to a neighborhood and we say, hey, we've got this really fantastic art that we're going to share with you, and your lives are going to be enriched because we share it. We actually need to show up and just talk to people and listen to what it is that they want. Because it might be that their neighborhood is plenty culturally rich, and in fact, they don't really need what we have to offer. And if that's the case, then maybe there's a mashup that we can actually do where we create something that's new and different and is better than the individuals and better than those independent cultures. So wherever possible, we tried to find moments like that in the community. And oftentimes that happens through partnerships. And I'll say that's one of the things that, as terrible as this COVID-19 situation has been for the world, the fact that we're able to take advantage of leveraging new partnerships, for us, it means with cancer hospitals, with the libraries, with the YMCA, with wonderful programs where they have seniors who have been isolated for months now, and we're actually able to do live bespoke video conferences where we're playing programs for isolated seniors who are listening to us play, but our musicians, both in the Toronto Symphony Orchestra as professionals, but also in our youth orchestra, they've gone through geriatric training in advance of these conversations so that they actually know how to talk to someone who might be suffering from dementia. And they know what they can do to make their lives better beyond just playing Bach beautifully. So that's a long answer, but it all kind of helps to give a sense, I hope, of what we feel like we can be doing in a place like Toronto, and what we can be doing when we can't do a concert for 2,500 people.
Absolutely. So just to kind of take that a little bit further, and you referenced earlier about this role of music in health and overall well-being. We've explored some of that here at the National Endowment for the Arts with some partnerships with the Department of Defense and other projects. Could you kind of just speak a little bit more about how you view that role of music, and are there things in addition to what you just mentioned that you're looking to explore with the orchestra to specifically address health and well-being?
Yeah, one of the things that we did really successfully and wonderfully, it's probably one of the more moving concert experiences I've ever had, is we did the first relaxed concert for neuroatypical audiences here in Toronto. So if you're on the autism spectrum, if you might have dementia, whatever, we trained the orchestra, we trained the front of house staff, and we basically allowed anyone to come in and expect that they were going to experience a concert where they would be safe, right? We created quiet rooms and safe spaces. We gave fidget spinners to people. And if they wanted to get up and leave the concert, they could. If they wanted to vocalize because they were enjoying themselves, they could. And what wound up happening through that experience was that we saw that we have put in place so many barriers for people to show up and just be enveloped by the sound of the symphony orchestra and what it can do, right? And people get so hung up on not clapping in between the movements and all the other rules and regulations of a concert hall. And so through that experience of seeing the powerful impact that we could have, we wanted to do more and more of that kind of work in the community. And we wanted to find ways where we could actually make that health and well-being industry motivation link with us. And look, music therapy is an extraordinary thing, and it requires a lot of school and it's a very special kind of musician that does that kind of work. We're not trying to do that, but we're trying to amplify and support things like a doctor actually in Canada can write a prescription for you to attend a performance for mental health attributes, right? So like, why wouldn't we want to try and take advantage of that and give people access and opportunity to bask in this incredible richness of sounds that an orchestra can be? But if that's not your thing, if you're not mobile, if you're intimidated by the concert hall, if you don't know the first thing about classical music, let us find a way to come to you, right? Let us find a hook that allows us to at least have that point of communication, have that storytelling, have that human connection. And I think that's something that resonates with everybody in the institution, and we're trying to make all that happen.
Oh, well, that's absolutely incredible. So unfortunately, we're running short on time, but this is an amazing background and information and insight into the things that you're doing with the Toronto Symphony Orchestra. But I'm also curious, and our audience is always curious, you specifically as an individual, these have been some really challenging times. How do you find your own inspiration or your own sense of strength as a leader, as an arts administrative leader? And that could be currently as your work in Toronto, or, Philadelphia, even going back to Aspen, others, you have this extraordinary career. What have you found works best for you as a leader to draw upon during those most difficult of times?
You know, I probably sound like a broken record because all of my reference points are music, but I keep coming back to what I learned when I was first playing in a string quartet in high school. And I was the second violinist. I was a freshman, and I'd been put in the senior string quartet, the best quartet there was. And I was the worst player in it, and I was scared to death. But I learned a lot. What I learned was that you have to show up prepared. You have to be ready. You have to do your homework. So I'm constantly trying to figure out what my homework is. What do I need to learn so that I can be inspired and be better for other people? The second thing is how to listen, not only to yourself and what you're actually producing, but horizontally. What is happening around you and how are you fitting into that? Because if you're just a soloist all the time, it's not going to work out, right? And if you're only accompanying all the time, that also gets boring pretty fast, right? And then the third thing that I try to pay attention to is identifying what my confirmation bias is. Like, what is the thing that I think I do really, really well, but in fact, I'm like actually not so great at that. And if you talk to anybody around me, they might say, yeah, like no, he's not so good at that. When you can figure out what that thing is, you can get a much better sense of how to move through the world in a way that's going to be helpful rather than harmful. So I don't know if that's inspirational or not, but that's how I try to organize myself.
And not only inspirational, but great guideposts that I think all of us can really look to as we try and build these types of leadership trajectories and address these types of challenges that exist today. Matthew Loden, thank you so much for coming on the show. You truly are one of the great arts engines that is powering human creativity in our field. Thank you.
Thank you for letting me be here, and thank you for having this program in the first place. It's so important, and I hope people enjoy it. Thank you.